Hey guys, tonight we are going to slip quietly into the narrow streets of 18th century Paris. The kind of streets that smell like damp stone, horsehair, and, if you're lucky, warm bread. You're about to time travel into a world where your shoes will get muddy, your coat will get smoky, and your stomach might start negotiating with you about how many copper coins you're willing to part with. You might not survive a day as a local, you'd probably starve before figuring out how to haggle for a stale baguette, but don't worry, I've got you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It keeps these sleepy walks through history alive. And hey, drop a comment telling me which city you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I love seeing where my little midnight walking club comes from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your boots click softly on uneven cobblestones. The air is damp, carrying a faint mist from the scene, and then it hits you warm bread. That's the first rule of 18th century Paris. Follow your nose and it will eventually lead you to a bakery. But don't picture the chic boulangeries of modern Paris. No glass displays, no croissants arranged like they're posing for a magazine. Here, the doorway is dark, the wood is cracked, and a young apprentice, covered head to toe in flour, is leaning against the door frame because he's been awake since, well, yesterday. You peek inside. It's more workshop than shop. Dim candlelight flickers against soot-streaked walls. A massive brick oven squats in the back like a sleeping dragon, its mouth glowing faint orange. The baker lifts a wooden peel and slides out loaves that are not quite perfect spheres and not quite sticks, but something in between. The humble pain de dough, the everyday bread of this era. It's rustic, it's slightly burned in places, and it smells like comfort itself. The baker nods at you, half asleep, and points to a basket by the door. The cheapest loaves called bread for the people cost a single sou. If you're unlucky, it's yesterday's bread, hard enough to double as a blunt weapon. And yes, there are historical records of people actually complaining that bread could break teeth. Scholars debate whether this was exaggeration or just a natural side effect of low-quality wheat mixed with rye and sometimes even powdered chestnut to stretch the supply. It turns out, revolution doesn't start with fiery speeches. It starts when your breakfast could chip a molar. A stray cat whines around your ankles. It's also waiting for breadcrumbs. Nothing in this alley ever goes to waste. Across the street, a second bakery is already surrounded by a small crowd. That's because this one makes white bread, reserved for those with a few extra coins to spare. White flour meant the bran had been removed, which ironically also removed most of the nutrition. People knew it was less healthy, but it looked fancier, and in a city obsessed with appearances, pale bread became a status symbol. Historians still argue about whether the obsession with white bread helped fuel later food shortages, but standing here in the cool Paris night, it just smells like another world. A cart creaks past, pulled by a sleepy mule, carrying sacks of flour from the city mills. You notice one of the sacks has a small mark, a royal stamp. This was a thing. Bread in Paris wasn't just food, it was political. Regulations controlled the price, the weight, and even the shape of loaves. Bakers who broke the rules could get fined or worse, shamed in public. There's a funny story from 1775 of a baker who tried to make smaller loaves to save flour. Locals noticed immediately and nicknamed them ghost loaves because they vanished in 2 bites. The baker hands you a warm piece, smaller than your palm. You bite in soft inside, crunchy outside, with a faint taste of smoke from the wood oven. For a moment, the whole world shrinks to that simple comfort. Behind you, a drunk man stumbles out of an alley, sees the bread in your hand, and shouts something incomprehensible about sharing. You wisely step aside, and as the night rolls on, the street quiets, leaving only the faint scent of flour and ash. If you close your eyes, you can almost forget the mud underfoot, the uneven stones, the distant hum of a city that never really sleeps. Here in the shadow of Notre Dame, you and your little loaf are part of a nightly ritual that has been repeated for centuries, one that feels oddly tender for a city so chaotic. Your walk continues, and the bread in your hand is already half gone, crumbs clinging to your fingers as you drift toward a small square where something far more fragrant than bread catches your attention. Steam curls in the lamplight. A huddle of Parisians surrounds a squat iron pot balanced precariously on a brazier. This, my friend, is the 18th century equivalent of street comfort food, a communal stew that's equal parts dinner and social life. You edge closer. The pot emits a scent that is difficult to describe. Onions, a whisper of beef, maybe cabbage, or maybe that's wishful thinking. Meat was a luxury, so the broth might have only been kissed by beef bones once in its lifetime. A woman in a thick shawl stirs with a ladle the size of your forearm. Her cheeks glow from the heat, and she greets customers with a raspy bonsoir before fishing out chunks of vegetables and ladling cloudy broth into wooden bowls. One man leans toward you and says, "If you smell garlic, you're lucky. If you taste garlic, you're blessed." Then he cackles, clearly amused by his own culinary poetry. Street stews like this were lifelines for the working poor. Paris kitchens often charged more than laborers could afford, so outdoor food stalls filled the gap. Historical notes mention something called potage à la ménagère, a housewife's stew thrown together from whatever was cheap that day. Leeks, turnips, bits of bread, soaked into thick soup. Sometimes vendors would drop in a bone with a hint of marrow to make the broth seem more luxurious than it was. You watch as a boy dunks a piece of stale bread into his bowl, letting it soften into edible mush. Another customer carefully adds a drizzle of what might be rendered fat or maybe just thin oil. A little girl nearby sprinkles something green into her soup parsley, the era's version of showing off. Historians still debate how safe these street stews were. Some argue that the constant boiling killed any danger. Others insist that using the same broth for days at a time, adding new water, vegetables, and bones, was a recipe for stomach adventures. Either way, this was nightly life, and the risk didn't stop anyone. You reach for a bowl, it's warm in your hands, the steam fogging your face in the chill night. You take a cautious sip. It's fine. Salty, smoky, faintly sweet from the onions, and filled with the comforting illusion that you've eaten a proper dinner. Behind you, someone is humming a tavern song. A toothless man waves his spoon like a conductor. Across the square, a pair of stray dogs sit like polite beggars, waiting for bowls to be set down for licking. You finish your stew, your fingers tingling from the heat, and notice the woman is already ladling the next portion to a soldier in a tattered coat. For a moment, you just stand there, steam curling around your head, the distant bells of Notre Dame marking the hour. You realize that this corner stew pot is more than food. It's a tiny beacon in the urban night, drawing in strangers, sharing warmth, and promising that no one leaves entirely hungry. The stew leaves a gentle warmth in your stomach as you wander farther into the labyrinth of Parisian streets. A faint chorus of laughter drifts from a narrow alley, leading you toward a wooden door with peeling blue paint. Above it hangs a creaky sign depicting a rooster lifting a wine cup, likely painted by someone who had never seen a sober rooster in their life. You've just found yourself an 18th century tavern, the heartbeat of local gossip and the birthplace of many questionable decisions. You duck inside. The air is thick with the perfume of smoke, spilled wine, and humanity in its most lived-in form. Candlelight flickers over rough-hewn tables, where sailors, laborers, and a suspiciously elegant gentleman in a powdered wig sit shoulder to shoulder. A fiddler in the corner is trying to tune an instrument that sounds like it's begging for retirement. Someone waves you over and pushes a clay mug into your hand. The liquid inside is cloudy and warm vin ordinaire, the cheap table wine that Parisians consider safer than water. One sip, and you understand why they didn't drink it for the flavor, but for the faint, relaxing fuzz it left in your brain. On the table, a plate of what looks like fried dough appears. A man with cheeks as red as cherries nudges it towards you. "We call them pets de non," he says proudly. You blink. Nuns. Farts? He nods, utterly serious. These were, in fact, little puffed fritters, the ancestor of modern beignets, crispy outside, soft inside, and absurdly comforting after a cold walk. Across the room, two women lean in to whisper about a scandal involving a baker and the mayor's wife. They don't lower their voices enough, and soon a wave of chuckles spreads like ripples across the tavern. This was social media before Wi-Fi, a warm room, shared wine, and the occasional exaggerated rumor. Historians still debate how widespread tavern culture really was for ordinary Parisians. Some argue that women rarely entered unless they worked there, while others point to records of female-run taverns and small cabarets where whole families might gather. Either way, these rooms were more than bars. They were relief valves for a city constantly buzzing with tension and politics. As the night deepens, the fiddler strikes up a lively tune. Someone claps in rhythm, and a boy barely in his teens starts an impromptu jig. The floor creaks under his steps, dust swirling in candlelight. You lean back, mug in hand, letting the hum of chatter, the soft music, and the smell of fried dough wrap around you. Somewhere beyond these walls, revolutions are brewing in whispers. But for now, your world is reduced to a warm tavern, a ridiculous plate of nuns' farts, and the cozy feeling that history's quieter moments might be the best ones. The tavern's warmth still lingers in your chest as you step back onto the chilly cobblestones. Paris at night is a soft blur of lamplight and shadow. Somewhere nearby, the river murmurs like a sleepy storyteller. You follow your nose rather than your map, and soon it leads you to a small square where the air smells like autumn, warm, nutty, and a little sweet. There he is, a chestnut vendor, bundled in layers of wool that make him look like a human cabbage. His cart is a simple iron drum with holes on the side, glowing like a miniature furnace. He doesn't shout to attract customers. The smell does all the work. A few workers huddle around, rubbing their hands and waiting for their little paper cones of roasted chestnuts. You step closer, and the vendor gives you a knowing nod. Cold night, eh? He says in French that even your half-imagined 18th century self understands. He hands you a twist of newspaper filled with steaming chestnuts. They're scorching hot. You juggle them from palm to palm, trying not to yelp. Chestnuts were the quiet heroes of street food in 18th century Paris. They fed workers, travelers, and anyone too poor for a proper dinner. Historical records note that during especially harsh winters, chestnut sales went through the roof. Historians still debate how many of these vendors were official and how many were under the radar, but the chestnuts were cheap, filling, and when fresh, almost sweet. As you blow on a chestnut and peel away its papery skin, you notice the vendor humming softly, a tune that sounds like it belongs to no particular century. Across the square, a stray cat prowls near the warm cart, waiting for a dropped morsel. Someone passes by carrying a loaf of bread under their arm, and for a moment, the square feels like a painting, still, ordinary, yet quietly alive. You lean against the edge of a fountain, nibbling chestnuts and watching the world wind down. Behind you, the stone cherubs carved into the fountain seem to smirk under the moonlight, as if they've seen hundreds of quiet nights like this. A church bell rings somewhere far away, slow, deliberate, as if it's telling the city to go to bed. A little fun fact: roasted chestnuts weren't just snacks, they were also improvised hand warmers. People would tuck the hot paper cones into their pockets, letting the heat seep into their fingers before eating. You do the same, and it's instantly comforting. Paris is starting to sleep, the alleys emptying, the river swallowing the distant echoes of the day. You finish the last chestnut, dust your hands, and for a second, you feel like you could stay in this moment forever. Warm chestnuts, soft moonlight, and a city that hums like a lullaby. You're still licking the chestnut sweetness from your fingers when the wind carries a different aroma, sharp, salty, and slightly funky. You follow the scent around a corner and almost bump into a donkey. Yes, a donkey. It's harnessed to a tiny wooden cart, and on that cart are wheels of cheese stacked like treasure. The cheesemonger is an older woman, wrapped in a shawl, with a face like a dried apple but eyes that sparkle like she knows every secret of the street. She's humming, slicing wedges from a wheel of soft cheese that smells both inviting and a little dangerous. A cat, clearly a local professional, lounges nearby, waiting for crumbs. In 18th century Paris, cheese wasn't the refined, delicate affair it later became in fancy salons. It was street food, a quick meal for laborers and night wanderers. Common cheeses like brie or fresh goat cheese were sold right from carts like this one. Historians still debate how safe these night cheeses were, since refrigeration wasn't exactly a thing yet. But people ate them anyway because hunger and habit beat caution almost every time. The cheesemonger offers you a small wedge wrapped in waxed paper. You take a tentative bite. It's creamy, slightly sour, and coats your tongue with the taste of the countryside. She nods, as if to say, "Yes, you're one of us now." You notice other details as you linger. Lanterns flickering in the damp breeze, cobblestones shining like wet ink, and the quiet sound of your own footsteps mixing with a distant lute. A man in a tricorn hat stumbles past, clutching bread and a cheese wedge, mumbling a song you can't quite place. For a moment, you imagine that Paris has a heartbeat, and tonight you're walking in rhythm with it. A funny fact: some Parisians swore that eating cheese at night helped them sleep, while others claimed it caused bizarre dreams. Historical, medical texts even argued about it, and scholars still laugh about how seriously people debated dream cheese. You consider that maybe tonight you'll find out which camp you're in. You thank the cheesemonger, tuck the last bite into your cheek like a secret, and drift onward. The streets smell now of damp stone, wood smoke, and faint cheese, a strange little perfume that only exists in this century. The night has truly settled now, like a soft quilt draped over Paris, Your steps echo lightly through the cobblestones as a new smell catches your attention: warm sugar, butter, and something fried. You follow it down a narrower alley and discover a tiny wooden stall with a lantern dangling from its roof. The stall owner, a plump man with flour in his eyebrows, is busy twisting dough into little knots and dropping them into sizzling oil. The oil hisses, the dough puffs, and the whole world suddenly smells like a carnival, even though this is just an ordinary Paris backstreet. He calls these treats Merveille's marvels, a kind of early fritter dusted with sugar. In 18th century Paris, fried sweets like this were more than snacks. They were tiny luxury moments. Sugar was expensive, so even a sprinkle on hot dough was a delight. Historical records note that street sweets were often sold near taverns and theaters, because tipsy or happy people are the best customers. Historians still debate whether these recipes came from Italy or from the convent kitchens of France. You take a warm, sugary knot from the vendor. It burns your fingers, then your tongue, but in a good way. The sugar crunches, the dough is airy, and for a fleeting second, you understand why someone would risk burning their lips for this. Around you, the city is quiet, except for the occasional clop of a horse or the murmur of river water. A young couple appears, sharing a pastry and giggling like they've just discovered a secret. A stray dog waits patiently for any sugar-dusted accident to fall to the ground. A curious little fact: some travelers wrote in diaries that Paris at night smelled like butter because vendors would fry dough or nuts along the main streets. Scholars still argue if that was true citywide, or if it was just the neighborhood effect near bakeries and sweet stalls. Tonight, at least in this alley, the claim is completely believable. You lean against a wooden post, finishing the last bite, fingers sticky and warm. The world feels slower here, almost like the city itself is sighing with contentment. You wipe your hands on a bit of old paper, nod to the vendor, and step back into the moonlit lane, carrying a faint halo of sugar in the cool night air. The air grows cooler as you drift toward the sound of distant laughter. Soon, you find yourself outside a small tavern tucked between two leaning houses. Its windows glow amber, and the door swings open just enough for the smell of wine, roasted meat, and faint pipe smoke to escape. You linger outside, because tonight isn't about going in, it's about tasting Paris from the street. A small cart sits nearby, its owner half dozing in a chair. On the cart, copper pans hold steaming onions, bits of leftover roast, and what look like miniature meat pies. The man notices you and grins. "Night snack?" he asks in French, his voice gravelly with sleep. 18th century Paris had an entire ecosystem of night food outside taverns. Drunks stumbled out, looking for something to soak up the wine. Vendors served onion soup, warm bread stuffed with trimmings, and little meat pastries known as chaussons. One old police report even complained that these carts blocked alleyways because people refused to leave without a second or third serving. You take a tiny pie. The crust is slightly tough, baked hours ago, but the filling rich with onions, maybe some veal, is heavenly under the night sky. Steam curls upward, mixing with the tavern music and the faint laughter of patrons leaning on the doorframe. A fun fact: onion soup was basically the hangover cure of the century. Travelers wrote that if you followed the smell of simmering onions at 2 a.m., you'd find your way to the best tavern street stalls. Historians still debate if the modern French onion soup truly evolved from these humble street pots, or if that's just a romantic story cooks tell. Behind you, a man in a tricorn hat stumbles out of the tavern, singing off-key. He buys 2 pies and immediately drops one. The dog from the last alley has followed you and scores another sugar-dusted victory, now with a meaty twist. You smile to yourself. Paris at night is not elegant or grand right now. It is warm bread, sticky fingers, and the comforting sense that even in the 18th century, someone was always willing to feed the midnight wanderers. The streets slope gently down toward the river, and soon you hear the calm, hushed breath of the Seine. Moonlight glimmers on the water, soft and broken, like someone sprinkled silver dust along the ripples. You follow the scent of roasted chestnuts and the faint hiss of boiling water to a small riverside stand. The stall is barely more than a plank balanced on 2 barrels, with an old woman wrapped in shawls tending a small brazier. On it, chestnuts crackle in their shells, and a dented kettle steams beside them. When she notices you, she waves silently and points to the chestnuts, her face lit by the red glow of the coals. 18th century riversides were unofficial markets at night. Vendors sold simple, warming snacks, chestnuts, mulled wine, or even boiled apples. Some journals from traveling merchants note that boatmen and night watchmen were their main customers. You can imagine a man finishing his shift, leaning against the stone embankment, chewing a hot chestnut to fight the damp river chill. You hand over a small coin and receive a paper twist of chestnuts. The first one burns your fingers, then your tongue. It's sweet, earthy, and somehow smoky from the brazier. The warmth flows down your throat, and for a moment, you feel like you belong to this quiet city of shadows and reflections. A fun fact: some historians still debate whether these vendors paid any tax at all. Records are fuzzy. Officials occasionally try to fine them for illegal trade, but the same women would pop up again the next week, kettle and chestnuts in tow. Across the water, Notre Dame looms in the dim night. A barge drifts by, a single lantern swaying, and its light trembles across your face. You linger here, slow and content, feeling the rhythm of the city's quiet side, a place where history hums softly instead of shouting. You wander under one of Paris's old stone bridges, where the night seems to collect in pockets of echoing darkness. The river laps softly against the piers, and your footsteps sound louder than they should. Then you spot a dim lantern swaying in the breeze. Beneath it stands a boy, no older than 12, guarding a small wooden cart with a single iron pot. The smell reaches you first, something savory, faintly spiced, with the kind of warmth that makes your stomach wake up. The boy stirs the pot with a stick that's clearly too long for him, then grins shyly. "Soup, monsieur?" he asks. His voice wobbles like the lantern. This was another part of 18th century Paris street life. Children sometimes ran these little bridge kitchens for workers who couldn't afford taverns. The soup was humble. Maybe cabbage, a few beans, stale bread soaked to make it filling. Yet, in some travel diaries, these soups were described as the most honest meal one could have at midnight. You kneel a little to accept the bowl. It's tin, slightly dented, and the soup is hot enough to fog your face. You blow gently and take a sip. It tastes simple. Salt, cabbage, and something smoky, maybe from the fire, maybe from a leftover ham bone, if the boy got lucky today. Fun fact: city records show that sometimes these kids were fined for blocking river access, but the police rarely chased them away for long. Historians debate if this was because the officers pitied them or because they also enjoyed the soup on a cold night. A barge creaks nearby, and the boy leans against the bridge wall, humming a little tune. You eat slowly, watching the moonlight ripple on the water and feeling, once again, that the city is much kinder in these small hidden corners than in its grand boulevards. By the time you leave the bridge, the city feels like it's holding its breath. A faint gray line brushes the horizon. Dawn is thinking about arriving, but not yet. That's when a new smell drifts through the cool air. Bitter, rich, and almost daring. Coffee. In 18th century Paris, coffee was the drink of night owls and early risers, and it often appeared on the streets before the Sunday. A few wooden carts, run by wiry men with red noses, would boil coffee in copper pots and sell it in tiny porcelain cups. It was a small luxury for workers finishing their night shifts or for gamblers staggering home from the Palais Royal. You find one of these carts on a street corner where the stones glisten faintly from river mist. The man tending the coffee looks like he hasn't slept in days, but his hands are sure as he ladles the dark liquid. He sprinkles in a hint of sugar rare and expensive in the 1702nd and hands you the cup with a sleepy grin. The first sip is shockingly strong. It's not the smooth, creamy coffee you might know. This is earthy, almost smoky, with a rough edge that wakes you up from the inside. The vendor nods as if he's seen this reaction 1,000 times. Bon, eh? He mutters, half a question, half a statement. Historical side note. French coffee culture was still young then. Historians debate whether these street vendors were the pioneers of the Parisian cafe scene or just opportunists selling a foreign novelty. Either way, the aroma became part of the city's dawn. As you sip, the city finally stirs. A single cart rumbles across the cobblestones. Somewhere, a baker opens his shutters. The faintest light brushes the edges of the rooftops, and you realize you've spent the whole night wandering the edible heart of Paris. And now, the day is almost ready to begin. The first true light of dawn stretches across the narrow Parisian streets, and with it comes a new soundscape, the soft clop of hooves, and a voice calling, "Late, late fray, fresh milk." You follow the sound and spot a man balancing two large metal pails on a wooden yoke. His horse-drawn cart is simple, with just enough room for a few more milk cans and a sleepy dog curled in the corner. Milk vendors were among the first true morning workers in 18th century Paris, serving families who couldn't afford to keep a cow or goat. He pours you a small tin cup of milk, still warm from the cow. It's richer than what you're used to, and a little grassy. Street milk was often unpasteurized, and historians note that city regulations were, let's say, inconsistent. Some journals from that time describe the pleasantly warm milk, while others warn that city milk comes with mystery surprises. Scholars still debate how risky this habit actually was. As you sip, other morning sounds rise. The call of the rag pickers, the squeak of wooden cartwheels, the distant hammering of blacksmiths. A woman leans out of her window to haggle over price, while a cat on the ledge eyes the milk like it's the meaning of life. Little details like this remind you that street food wasn't only about indulgence, it was survival, routine, and the quiet rhythm that carried Paris from night into day. You hand back the cup, and the milkman nods, already moving on, his voice echoing between the stone walls. In the early light, the city feels softer, wrapped in a warm, slightly milky haze. The streets are now fully awake, and so is your nose. You follow the smell of warm yeast and wood smoke to a small square where the market is yawning itself to life. Stalls creak open, crates appear from nowhere, and suddenly you're surrounded by the quiet bustle of early Paris. Bakers arrive first, their carts piled with golden loaves, still breathing steam. Baguettes are a 19th century icon, but in the 18th century, bread looked a bit different. Round, rustic bowls with thick crusts that could survive a long day of travel or work. One baker waves you over and breaks a piece from a still warm loaf. It's chewy, nutty, and dusted with ash from his wood-fired oven. He tells you that bread wasn't just food, it was survival. In fact, Parisians ate more bread than anything else, often a kilo or more per person per day. Historians debate whether this dependence was a point of pride or a sign of desperation. Bread riots were real, and this quiet little square could turn into a spark if supplies faltered. You wander deeper into the market. A fishmonger splashes water over shiny river fish while muttering about better catches upriver. A woman selling apples rubs them on her apron until they gleam, then casually eats one herself. The air is a soft mix of flour, dust, smoke, and the faint metallic tang of the Seine drifting nearby. As a group of children dart between stalls, chasing each other with a crust of bread like its treasure, you feel the market humming into full rhythm. This is Paris in its most edible form, a city that smells of its breakfast before the sun fully rises. By now, the market is buzzing, and your sweet tooth finally wakes up. You follow a faint caramel scent to a corner where a man with a copper pan is stirring something golden and sticky. It's an 18th century Parisian street, sweet, a mix of honey, nuts, and maybe a whisper of cinnamon if the merchant is feeling generous. Sugar at this time is still a luxury. Most Parisians rely on honey for their sweetness, and imported cane sugar from the colonies is carefully rationed. The merchant sees your curiosity and hands you a tiny shard of hardened candy, almost like a crystallized sunshine shard. It cracks under your teeth with a soft crunch and melts into a warm nuttiness that makes your mouth hum. He tells you these were sometimes called poor man's almonds, though they aren't poor at all if you count how precious sugar was. Historians debate whether these little treats were everyday indulgences or more of a special street market event. Diaries from the period hint that children often waited near these pans for the rare chance to lick the spoon. Nearby, a young boy is twisting a rope of sticky molasses into a loop, trying to create a makeshift lollipop before the syrup drips onto his hand. His laughter mixes with the clang of the copper pan, and for a moment, the air smells like the happiest corner of Paris. You lean against the edge of the stall, watching the syrup bubble slowly like amber breathing in the morning light. In a world where most life is bread, fish, and cabbage, this small burst of sweetness feels almost like a holiday on your tongue. As the sun climbs a little higher, the streets start to feel like a moving breakfast parade. You notice that not all food stays put in stalls. Paris in the 18th century is full of wandering vendors, and each of them has a signature shout that echoes down the alleyways. A man with a tray of steaming chestnuts balances it on his head, singing a tune that sounds more like a lullaby than a sales pitch. Behind him, a young girl weaves through the crowd with a basket of soft cheese wrapped in leaves. She offers you a taste, and it's tangy, slightly grassy, and probably made just days ago in a village that would take you a week to walk to. Then comes a vendor with a small barrel slung across his chest. He's selling warm, spiced wine for the morning chill. You take a careful sip, It's closer to mulled cider than the wines, flavored with whatever spices he could afford, maybe clove, maybe just cinnamon if he's lucky. Historians still debate exactly how common these vendors were, since most written records focus on indoor taverns. But countless engravings hint at a street life full of snacks on the move. One vendor pushes a cart with a handbell, calling out something like, "Fresh milk, still warm." He points to a goat tethered to the back of the cart, and you realize the milk is truly fresh. A passing boy jokes, "Don't blink or the milk will walk away." As you stroll among these mobile kitchens, the city feels alive in a different way, not just a place of grand cathedrals and salons, but a place where breakfast jingles across cobblestones, carried by human voices and the rattle of wooden wheels. By the time the sun finally clears the roofs of Paris, the market begins to exhale. The lively chaos of dawn softens into a slower rhythm, and the last wave of street food vendors offer what feels like the city's gentle goodbye snack. You find a woman with a basket of tiny pancakes, thin, almost like soft coins, still warm from the griddle she balances over a small charcoal pot. She sprinkles them with a dusting of powdered sugar that immediately vanishes into the soft surface. A little boy beside her licks the sugar off his fingers before his mother pretends to scold him. Across the street, a man sells warm bread soaked in milk and honey, essentially a poor man's dessert, though to you it tastes like a hug you can eat. He explains that this is a way to use yesterday's bread, giving it a second life. Historians still debate whether this kind of street breakfast was considered a luxury or a survival habit, but diaries suggest it was both, depending on how much sugar or honey you could spare. A soft breeze carries the smell of ash and bread crust mingled with the river scent from the Seine. A cart creaks by, carrying leftover vegetables and the last pieces of smoked fish, tonight's dinner for someone else. A bell tolls faintly in the distance, and the whole street seems to collectively sigh. You realize that Paris, after this morning feast, doesn't really wake up in a hurry. It stretches like a cat, curling back into its narrow alleys, waiting for the next market day to start the dance again. For now, your walk ends with sticky fingers, a quiet smile, and a sense that even in the 18th century, a city could have a heartbeat made entirely of bread, sugar, and human chatter. And now, as our little stroll through 18th century Paris fades, you can almost hear the city quieting behind you. The clinking of coins, the soft shuffle of shoes, and the distant creak of wooden carts all begin to melt into the kind of sound you might only notice in a dream. Your hands are a little sticky from honey, your coat faintly smells of bread and ash, and your steps feel slower, like they've absorbed the lazy rhythm of the streets. Somewhere far away, a bell rings once, then disappears into the hum of the city going back to sleep. If your eyes are heavy now, let them close. Imagine the Seine carrying the last crumbs of the morning into the distance, the way a lullaby carries you into a softer world. Breathe in once more bread, sugar, and river air, and then let it all drift away. Good night, traveler. May your dreams be warm as fresh bread and light as powdered sugar. End of the story. Sleep well.